Can you tell the difference between something shot on a $30,000 camera versus a $4,000 camera? I'm not going to tell you which is which yet, but this video is all about how some of today's relatively inexpensive digital prosumer cameras are kind of catching up to some of today's industry standard cinema cameras. To see this in action, we're facing off two very different yet surprisingly very similar Sony cameras. The first one is the Sony Venice, a truly remarkable camera that's been used to shoot films and television series you might be familiar with. And the other camera is the Sony FX3, a smaller digital cinema camera that has quickly become a favorite for videographers and cinematographers alike. And it's gotten a lot of buzz recently since it was revealed that the FX3 was used to shoot The Creator, a large-scale sci-fi epic film that you might expect to have been shot on something like the Venice. But how does a camera like the FX3, which can cost anywhere between $3,500 and around $4,000, compare to a much more expensive cinema camera like the Sony Venice? Oh, don't wear your sunglasses when you're operating cameras. Hey everyone, I'm Justin, a videographer here at MPB, and today we're going to take these two cameras, put them in the same shooting scenarios, compare the footage, and see if you can tell the difference. We tested both cameras in a natural light setting and in a studio setting where we experimented with each camera's low light capabilities.
Lens cap is on.
Yep. It sure is. There we go. Look at that. That's nice. So first we'll take a look at our natural light test. Can you tell which is the Venice and which is the FX3? Now let's take a look at our studio test where we tried a few different lighting setups. Can you tell which is which this time? So overall, these comparisons proved to be pretty close. But let's take a closer look into each camera's similarities and differences, and we'll show you how we got here. The Sony Venice is undoubtedly a beautiful camera. Its full-frame sensor features over 15 stops of dynamic range, and you can shoot raw footage in 6K up to 60 frames per second. To shoot 6K raw footage with the Venice, it would require an external recorder, and we don't have that with us for this test. So we're just going to be sticking to recording internally in 4K. And while not shooting in 6K RAW doesn't exactly access the camera's full capabilities, we are going to switch the imager mode to 6K so that way we're using as much of the sensor as possible. The FX3 also has a full-frame sensor with 15 plus stops of dynamic range, and it has the ability to record 4K RAW footage to an external recorder. But for this test, we're matching both cameras, recording internally in 4K at 24 frames per second. Both cameras have the ability to shoot in S-Log3, which is standard for Sony cinema cameras. The FX3, however, does come with some other options for a quicker color grading experience, which is useful for videographers needing a quick turnaround time. Both cameras support E-mount lenses, but the Venice comes with a PL mount adapter. The Venice actually comes with a lot of different imager modes that allow you to shoot with a variety of lenses, including anamorphic lenses, if that anamorphic look is something you're going for. But we're not doing that here. We're sticking to spherical lenses for this test. To even the playing field, we rented a PL mount adapter for the FX3, and we equipped both cameras with the same 35mm Zeiss Supreme Prime lens. It's important to note that the FX3 wasn't really made with these types of lenses in mind, so without the right accessories, it can feel a little clunky. Ideally, you'd want some extra support, even more than what we had on this shoot. We're also forfeiting the FX3's ability to use autofocus. Cinema cameras like the Venice do require manual focus anyway, so generally you'll want a follow focus or a wireless follow focus system that an Assista camera can operate from an external monitor. Or you can just use your hands right on the barrel. Something the Venice does have, which you'll miss on the FX3, but find in its older siblings like the FX6 or the FX9, are built-in ND filters. ND filters are more often than not a necessity when you're shooting outside. For the FX3, we're attaching this matte box to the front of the lens and placing ND filters inside as needed. You should kind of be getting the idea here that in order to keep up with the Venice, the FX3 needs a lot of attention and accessories. But one incredible feature the FX3 has, which I'm sure you're familiar with if you know a bit about the FX3, is its low light capabilities. The FX3 has a dual base ISO of 800 and 12,800. This is a win over the Venice, which has a dual base ISO of 500 and 2500. And there's a surprisingly minimal amount of noise at the FX3's higher base ISO, as opposed to when you just crank the ISO manually. But we'll get more into that later. The FX3 also has size going for it if you're a solo shooter or working with a small crew. That being said, I found the Venice to be relatively easy and straightforward to operate. But the FX3's more accessible capabilities and its size make it more ideal for a solo shooter. When compared to the Venice, it's obviously smaller, more akin to cameras like the A7S III, and generally the camera is just more nimble by design. And with its impressive internal image stabilization, going handheld or on the shoulder isn't out of the question. The FX3 also comes with this nifty top handle for audio inputs, and it's a great attachment for handheld shooting. All this behind-the-scenes footage you're seeing was actually filmed with the FX3 in a handheld rig by our freelance camera operator, Dan. Because of its size, the FX3 is easily paired with a small stabilizer or other low-cost rigs. And while the Venice can be placed on the shoulder, it is pretty heavy, and it would require additional support to really hold this camera with all of its accessories. Sony has also developed the Rialto system specifically for the Venice, and it's pretty cool. This basically allows you to detach the sensor by way of a durable cable, making shooting handheld a lot easier, and it allows you to get shots in tighter spaces. But this setup does also require a lot of other moving parts, and in most cases you'll need a camera crew to help you pull focus and a lot of other things. As far as inputs and outputs go, the Venice really has it all. Like I said, this camera is really built for a team to use, so it has a lot of compatibility for accessories. It also has 2 screens on either side, as well as a viewfinder, and a really comprehensive menu system. If you use Sony cameras like the A7S III, then you'll be pretty familiar with the FX3's menu system as well. The FX3 just has the one screen, which is very adjustable, but for this test, we'll be attaching an external monitor via HDMI. For the natural light test, once we match the settings on both cameras and put some of those extra ND filters in for the FX3, we were able to match the exposure. The real giveaway for the FX3 is the way it treats the highlights. The Venice generally has better highlight roll-off as opposed to the FX3, where the contrast is much more noticeable. Even in the harshest conditions, the Venice is doing a better job with the highlights. We used the same LUT when color grading, but the footage from the Venice was a little easier to work with. While the FX3 skewed more green and was a little more contrasty, the Venice seems to read colors more accurately. But overall, it wasn't that difficult to match the footage and get a pretty neutral look from both of them. I also really love this monitor. This Small HD 702 is really nice, so shout out to Small HD for doing a great job. When shooting handheld, honestly it was easier with the FX3 just because it's lighter. But generally, the internal stabilization on both cameras was a huge help and pretty impressive. For the studio test, we wanted to see how each camera performed in different lighting scenarios, particularly in low light options as well. We started with a simple 3-point lighting setup along with a backlight to light the backdrop in order to get a nice evenly lit shot for both cameras. For these shots, we have each camera set at their lowest base ISO, the Venice at 500 and the FX3 at 800. Then we took lights away one at a time and tried different combinations. This helped us see how each camera treated the shadows and the highlights. Again, this is generally a really close call, but I do feel like the Venice is superior here. To me, the FX3 still isn't as strong in terms of highlight roll-off and the way it treats colors in the skin tones and shadows. All that being said, it's still a really close comparison. Then we took all the lights away, and this is where the FX3 was really impressive. We switched the Venice to its highest base ISO of 2500 and the FX3 to its highest base ISO of 12,800. The difference here is pretty obvious. The FX3 is completely illuminating our subject. And while you do see a little bit of noise when you switch to the higher base ISO, for 12,800 there really isn't that much, especially when compared to the Venice at 2,500. It can adapt to virtually any lighting scenario, and you can shoot in low-lit environments with a lot less help from natural light or hefty lighting rigs. The only source of natural light here was this window due to a broken curtain. But we managed to flag that off so it didn't illuminate our subject too much. You can see just how dark the room was in our behind-the-scenes footage, shot with an FX3 at 800 ISO.
Ugh.
That's great. Love that.
I'm an actor.
Even though these two cameras have different strengths and weaknesses, and even though the Venice did pull ahead a little in terms of image quality, this test really proves to me that the footage you can get from these two cameras is really comparable, and pretty close. And maybe you don't need the most expensive cinema camera to get a beautiful image. Okay, that's great, but what I really want to stress is that these types of comparisons are not meant to disparage higher-end cinema cameras like the Sony Venice. There are immense benefits to using these types of cameras that consumer or prosumer cameras just don't really have yet. But the gap between these two types of cameras is shrinking really quickly. And that's just really exciting for independent filmmakers, videographers, or in this case, anybody who shoots with Sony cameras. But what do you think? Do you think we're approaching a time where larger productions will switch to smaller, inexpensive, or prosumer cameras more often? Or are the high-end cinema cameras here to stay for the most part? Let us know what you think in the comments. And you can subscribe to our channel to see more gear reviews, comparisons, and a bunch of other cool stuff. I'm Justin with MPB. Thanks for watching.